Luxury, my man, what's up?
Diallo, man, I'm having such.
Nobody cares. Listen, welcome to One Song.
You do not want to hear about my day? Okay,
no,
that's
no,
fine.
that's
fine. I understand.
absolutely do.
This
But
podcast
right
is
now,
not called One Day. It's called One Song. We're here to talk about a song, not my day.
It's not called A Day in the Life, man.
Fair enough.
Dude, the artist we're talking about today is quite literally everywhere.
That's right, Diallo. Lately, we have seen this artist portrayed on the silver screen here in Hollywood. Murals of him are painted all over the world. His poster is a favorite in college dorm rooms.
At least when we were in college dorm rooms. We haven't, to be clear, we haven't been in any college dorm rooms in a long time.
I have not recently been
Stop
in a college
suggesting
dorm room,
that.
but it's probably safe to assume that he continues to be an icon for stoners everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's hard to verify his exact album sales, but it's estimated he sold over 75 million records worldwide. He's one of the most popular musicians of all time, and his music is so universally loved and celebrated, it can at times seem a little bit too ubiquitous.
That's right, Luxury. Today's artist is so widely played that I sometimes wonder if we've really stopped hearing his music.
Yeah, actually hearing it. That's a good point.
Yeah. But all that changes today on this podcast because you're going to hear Bob Marley and his masterpiece, Jamming, like never before.
Now it sounds funny to say jamming. You can say jammin'.
Well, we found out that there's a G at the end.
That's the spelling, but what he sings is jamming.
Oh, he says jammin'. But I'm not going to do that because there will be no fake patois in this episode.
I think dropping
no
the G seems like a good idea, but you don't have to go all the way to the patois. That would be
We're going to be talking about jamming on this episode.
It seems uncomfortable and cringy. Jamming. We're going to be jamming on this episode.
I'm just trying to show my respect. This is One Song. All right, I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ Diallo Riddle.
And I'm producer, DJ, and songwriter Luxxury, also known as the guy who talks about
Interpolations.
on TikTok.
Kills me a little bit
I'm
inside.
just such a fan of my new toy. One more time. The guy who talks about
Interpolation.
You know,
on
shout out to
TikTok.
all the people who have tried to give me a catchphrase.
Yeah.
A lot of people say I say
Do you have a
shout
top-
out a lot.
Do you have a
and
top three or?
I think right now my favorite is somebody suggested it could be infuriating. Which is good because I didn't realize I say
Sounds
infuriating
like-
a lot.
Oh, I thought it was a slam on me.
But no, but like
Okay.
it kind of works on many levels. So
Oh,
maybe
boy.
every time you say interpolation, I'll say infuriating.
But when I use the sampler,
Yeah, those watching on YouTube can see me visually die a little bit
visually
inside.
infuriated.
But we'll keep workshopping that. Okay, so Luxury, I want to start here. It's our thesis statement about Bob Marley's music and this idea that Marley is so iconic and it almost distances you from an artist that you think you know, but some of us have just not investigated
Right.
as much as others. I think it goes back to this. You said it in the opening, like, in my mind, I always think about being a student at Harvard and going into, every dude's dorm room and they've got the Legends poster up. And,
Right.
and by the way, I'll say
And they're smoking weed, right?
disclaimer right at the top. I
Yeah.
have tried to do weed. It's just not every chemical
It's
is
not
for
for me either,
everybody.
that's
I
funny.
just
We have that
I
connection.
don't respond to it the
I
same
don't either. I
way.
fall right asleep. I was never a weed guy.
But there's an artist there, and there's a reason why his music is globally powerful and globally popular, and I think we just really need to listen to his music differently, as if for the first time.
I think that's right. Bob Marley is iconic. He is a global cultural ambassador for Jamaica for the idea of revolution and resistance and politics in music. Like, he almost perfected that. It existed before him, but his entire body of work is a new version, a new level of bringing politics and love and Rastafarianism and all of this together in this one body of work in his oeuvre. He's a very important artist. We love him. He, for all the reasons you just said, sometimes can be two people representing an idea very different from what the actual artist is, who the actual artist is.
Well, can I
Yeah.
throw out one more thing? We've said on the show before, like, I really liked The Cure as a kid, and
I wasn't expecting
because
that
I was in an
connection.
all-black school, I didn't know there was a whole like clothing style and an attitude that you had to adopt to be a fan of the
You didn't know
Cure.
about goth?
I didn't know, really. I mean, I saw a couple of
Cure
movies
abstracted
in the 80s.
from goth? What even is that?
I saw a couple of movies in the 80s and I was like, oh, that looks a little extreme. But like, because I wasn't around it, I didn't let the fandom of the artist sort of get in the way of my appreciation of the
Well,
music.
that's
And I
probably
think
the best way,
similarly,
yeah.
I also have, and you're going to hear a lot about him in this episode. I know you listen to the podcast. Shout out to my brother. He was a Rastafarian for over a decade, and with dreadlocks and the whole thing. And he had such a love of Robert Nesta Marley that there was no way for me to like get into it without sort of feeling like, oh, I'm just listening to Tony's music. You know what I mean?
Right,
So
right.
I say all that just to say that was sort of my barrier to the music. But now we're going to hear the music.
We're going to talk about Bob Marley. We're going to talk about how specific and individual he was as an artist, like literally even in the genre of reggae. To a lot of people, I think what we're referring to is this phenomenon that for a lot of people who aren't big reggae fans, reggae may to them mean Bob Marley, but reggae and Bob Marley are not one and the same. There's a big difference. He is a very specific slice,
and he's
a
major figure.
Major figure.
Major figure.
We'll talk about several of the major figures in his life. It's not an accident that Bob Marley appeals to so many white people in America because that was a marketing plan that succeeded. We're going to talk about that today. And Chris Blackwell
I can't wait to
Island
talk about
Records.
that because the band themselves were stressed out about that. They would do these
caused
sold out.
the
They do these
fracture.
sold out shows in America, and they look out there and they'd be like, "Where are the black people?"
It caused the implosion of one of the first versions of the band ended because of that change.
Totally. I want to make one note though to people like my brother. Hey, look, we have lots of facts for you as well. We always come into this episode with, we hope, sort of like information for people who don't know the artist that well, but also plenty of fun, wonderful facts that we hope that you have not heard before. We did our research for this one. This one consumed so much time. We knew the movie was going to come out. We're going to talk about the movie a little bit towards the end of the show. But for right now, because there is a movie about Bob Marley's life that's out right now, and we're going to talk about that. But Luxury, before we get into the stems, I want you to give the One Song Nation the Bob Marley backstory.
Let's talk a little bit about, as you said, Robert Nesta Marley.
Yeah.
By the way, first thing, exactly building on what you just said, this little disclaimer at the top. This is the ultimate episode where, because it's such an oral history where different accounts are all
different people have different
people have
stories.
different stories that change over time.
Yeah.
And we've both seen the documentaries. I've read a number of books. There's one in particular by Roger Steffens I'd recommend called So Much Things to Say. But that 2012 documentary was great too. The bottom line is many stories are told from many angles and many facts are disputed.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into some of the disputes later on because they extend to the music itself. And there's a lot of people who are crediting themselves with having written certain songs, and there's not a lot of agreement about it.
You sell 75 million records.
Yeah.
There are going to be some lawsuits.
Where there's a hit, there's a writ, as they say. Yeah.
Luxury, before we get into the music, I want to give the One Song Nation just an idea of Bob Marley's childhood. He's born February 6, 1945, in the just a rural place, 9 Mile, St. Anne, Jamaica.
It's on a hill, like he's literally rural on
Dude,
the hillside.
First thing I thought, I was like, oh, Eminem 8 Mile, Bob Marley 9 Mile. If you're
Ooh,
going to
interesting.
give birth to a
legend.
famous musician, a legend, try and find a street with the word mile in the name, apparently. They said he grew up among the Pinniwallies, which I think is like the most beautiful term I've ever heard for fireflies.
I'd never heard that word before.
They're like, he grew up among the
I'm learning already. I
Pinniwallies. There
love
goes
this.
the fake patois. I'm not going to do that whole episode, I swear to God. And they called him a red pinkney, and I didn't know what that meant. The American equivalent would be red bone. In other words, he was light skinned. This is because his father was Captain Norval Marley, a 60-year-old British man who worked in Jamaica and met Marley's mom, a black woman, obviously. Black woman. You can't call her a black woman. She was 16 at the time.
Yeah.
He was in his 60s. She was 16. They only knew each other briefly, but because of his parentage, he was what they would call half caste. The people recognized him as being mixed. And to a certain extent, that made him an outcast. His uncles gave him more work to do with the horses, just because, to a certain extent, they weren't sure how to claim him. And so in this just very rural setting, Bob has his first exposure to music. They said that from the time he was a child, he would sing, some of his favorite songs for people. And, they would beat on boxes, the Roomba box and the banjo.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget. Growing up in Atlanta, I always associated the banjo with that kid in Deliverance.
It's from Africa.
I was like,
yeah.
It's an African instrument. And it only gained popularity in America in the minstrel shows where white people would adopt the affectations and obviously the black face and they would pretend to be black, and they would play the banjo. But somehow the banjo became associated with country, rural white folks, and I think, we just might have moved on from the banjo. But Marley's playing all this stuff in Jamaica. And then at some point his mom moves from, the mountains and this rural part. She moves to Trenchtown. And this is a very formative time in Marley's life because, there are more people here, and he talks about, there were the bad guys, so to speak, the gangsters, for the lack of
Rude
a better
boys.
term.
Yeah.
And but he's soaking all this in, and people liked Marley, and they said that he was a person who had a lot of charm, right from the beginning, right in the early days of his childhood.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like, the story of Bob Marley is the story of an outcast, and it really, knowing his backstory really helps you understand his music, because he, as he says himself, and as people say in the documentary, he didn't feel like he fit in with the white people or the black people. He didn't fit in with his own family. He was very much an outcast and a rebel, not by his own making. And he obviously channeled all that into his music. That's where he put everything, all of his
But
emotion.
I also got the impression that it was through his music that he was able to really connect with people, and it was through music that he was able to find his home in the Black Jamaican
Perfectly
community.
put, because we're going to talk also on this episode. There's a number of unsung, I would say, or differently sung there's a cast of hundreds that made Bob Marley's music popular.
Yes.
A handful of these people, though, very much seem like father figures when you read about them. So we're going to talk about Cox and Dodd. We're going to talk about Joe Higgs, Lee Scratch Perry. We're also going to talk about kind of an overly sung figure, in my opinion, which would be Chris Blackwell. Very controversial. Obviously made him a global superstar, the head of Island Records. But at the same time, possibly took a little more credit than deserved. We'll talk about all these guys on this episode today.
Yeah.
So I'm going to set the stage. It's Jamaica. It's 1962. This is when Jamaica gets its independence from England. By the way, independence, but colonialism is still kind of the order of the day. Like, racism doesn't end in Jamaica in 1962
no.
just because of independence. But it is the beginning, though, of ska. We've talked on another episode. Go to our Sister Nancy episode. It's sort of a sister episode to this one. We get into more depth about the origins of ska into rocksteady into reggae. But it's important to mention this because the earliest music that Bob Marley is making is actually ska music. And I'm going to tell you...
And 1962.
Starting in 62. So one character I mentioned earlier, an unsung hero in the story, is Joe Higgs. He's known as the godfather of reggae by many. He himself was an early recording artist in the late 50s. He actually had a song in 1958 I'll play for you called Manny O. This is one of the first records ever pressed in Jamaica.
Oh, Manny O, Manny O, why did you go? Why did you go? You leave me all alone, lady. Please come home. Please on.
And it's worth pointing out how American R&B sounding that was. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought one of the coolest things that I always knew, just from my own background, with my own love of ska, is that they were listening to the American groups.
Yep.
And they were trying to sound like the American groups.
Them.
I love the fact that, that there's a Bob Marley version of Why Must I Be a Teenager in Love.
So Joe Higgs, who we just heard, is the gentleman who teaches Marley to sing. And at this point, Mr. Marley has met, by the way, he's being called Robbie at this point. He hasn't changed his name to Bob. So Robbie meets another young teenager, they're teenagers, named Neville O'Reilly Livingston, who soon changes his name to Bunny. And Robbie and Bunny are taught to sing by Joe Higgs, and they meet a third gentleman. I keep saying gentlemen. These are all young teenagers.
These are teenagers.
Kids. And his name is Peter McIntosh, but is soon known as Peter Tosh. The three of them form the Wailers, and they were trying
to figure out what their version of the dramatics and the impressions,
right? The ink spots.
And so they go with the Wailers.
Yeah, because these are vocal groups, by the way. They're not really playing instruments. This is all harmonizing. They're doing, it's basically doo-wop, the Jamaican version, or just harmonizing like all the American acts are doing.
Absolutely.
The R&B acts,
I want to play a snippet by the Impressions, a song called Man Oh Man, because I like to think that both Bob Marley and Young Jeezy like this song. And for those who probably already guessed, that was sampled in the Young Jeezy song featuring Jay-Z, Go Crazy.
Yeah, dope boy, this is the official Hustlers anthem. You getting money? Throw it in the air.
Guess who's possessed? Still smell the blow on my clothes like Krispy Kreme. I was cooking them moans.
I love sampling.
Yeah, sampling's the best.
The best sampling. It always goes really hard. So, and by the way, Young Jeezy's talking about some, street stuff in Atlanta. Meanwhile, we're in Trenchtown.
Street stuff's going down
and
here too.
They're listening to the Impressions, which is the music that Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer are working on themselves. And I just got to play this before we leave the year 1962. This is a snippet of the very first song to feature Bob Marley's vocals. This is a song called Judge Not. And listen to a little bit of the lyrics, because what's crazy is even though this did not, it failed to, achieve a huge amount of success for the group, it does predict what Bob Marley will be singing about later in his career, because you'll hear a sort of political message in it. This is Judge Not.
Who are you to judge me and the life that I live?
Who are you to judge me
Who
in
are
the
you to
life I
judge
live?
me?
Bob is 16 here.
Yeah. He's
16.
already feeling the scrutiny of
I know he's
the
already
judgment. Yeah.
he's already looking at society and trying to find the hypocrites.
Society's looking at him, and he's getting harassed by the police, as he talks about, and he's feeling it, and comes out in he's 16 when he writes the song. It's crazy, the lyrics.
By the way, someone tried to convince him at one point to change his name to Adam Marley, and he was like, "No,
Nah.
I'm Bob."
I'm Bob. Well, let's move on to 1963. At this point, Cox and Dodd enters the picture. Cox and Dodd is the legendary founder of Studio One, the first really important label in Jamaican music.
So important to the sound system, so important to the eventual development of the DJ as we think of it today. Like, Cox and Dodd, he's such a legend.
He's such a legend. He signs the band, the Wailers, and their first single is called Simmer Down. Now, this is a song that when you hear it, you're hearing just the vocals of the band. It's the three boys, Peter, Bob, and Bunny, along with three other members of the band, 6 total singers. The music is coming from the Scatolites, who are the Studio One house band, basically. And this is Simmer Down from 1963.
Simmer down, put it to the heart, so simmer down. Soon you'll get drugged, so simmer down. Can you hear what I say?
I love the story.
So joyful.
Oh, listen, I love the story that when this song comes out, it's so popular in the dance halls that
they keep replaying it over
they
and over
just
again.
play it over and over. Like other songs can't even get in the mix.
Yeah.
That is a
That song goes to number 1 in 1964. It's their first single with Studio One.
Yeah.
And it starts a long, actually 5-6 year period where they're making records for Studio One, but they're really not going anywhere because the records are huge in the dance
They're
hall.
huge in
Sound
the dance
systems,
hall.
they love them at the sound system,
Yeah.
but they're not being played on the radio.
Nobody's playing them on the radio, and this is at a time when there's some straight thuggery happening.
Yeah.
Literally, those guys would
Payola.
show up at
Big
your
time.
radio station and basically say you have to play this right now, or bad things will happen.
It's worth mentioning the sort of gangster element, both of the record industry and politics, which is starting to simmer down. It'll get worse as the story progresses, and it is related to the story. The long story short about this era, and by the way, they're still called the Wailers. It's not Bob Marley and the Wailers. The Wailers stay with Cox and Dodd in Studio One,
Right.
and they are making, according to Bunny Wailer, like a whopping 3 pounds a week. They're very frustrated.
Yeah.
They're not able to tour. They don't have any money. At a certain point, they get tired and they leave Studio One, and they go to work with our second undersung or unsung hero, and one of my favorite, if not my favorite, producer of all time, Lee Scratch Perry.
Yeah.
In 1969, enters the picture. Very important figure in Bob's life as a person.
Person you've probably heard about.
Yeah.
Even if you're not into reggae, you've probably heard of Lee Scratch.
You probably heard of Lee Scratch Perry. He had a very long career. He just passed away a couple years ago and made probably 100, maybe 200 records. Very prolific producer. He's an artist himself. You can hear him singing a lot of his artists, a lot of his
I want to
records.
say something about the Jamaican scene in general because you've made me think about this. On this show, we're big fans of. There are very few people walking around saying like, "Oh, sampling isn't art," and "Oh, hip hop that's not like that." That's something you don't hear very much anymore. But you got to put it in its context. Like Jamaica at this time is cranking out their own versions of all these American hits.
Right,
Maybe
right.
a couple of
Replays,
British hits,
right.
but like so many. And in a weird way, like that's sampling. In a weird
Yeah.
way, that's like a do-over. And it made me think that there's so much to be gained from rampant copyright abuse. Like,
Yeah.
if they weren't, no, seriously, like if they
Yes.
weren't covering these songs and doing their own versions of these songs, they might have eventually crossed over to the United States and just done what was happening over there. But because
Yeah.
they sort of lived in this weird sort of like bubble, it led to. It's sad to say, it seems like copyright abuse leads to some of the best stuff because
Well, it should be
early
said-
hip hop artists didn't know that sampling would one day be known as art. They just were like, we want to move the dance hall. We want to move this crowd. And
You're absolutely
Yeah.
right, and it needs to be pointed out that there was literally no such thing as copyright law in Jamaica until the early 1990s.
oh wow,
At the same time, there was something known as we know we're being piratey. There was an awareness at times, and we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the songwriting conflicts, as was alluded to, and they do exist for Bob Marley songs in a big way. But you're absolutely right, and I think about this a lot too. How Jamaica is kind of like a perfect little experiment. What happened if we threw copyright out the window for 20, 30 years and see what happens creatively? Wonderful things happen musically and creatively. Not such wonderful things necessarily on the finances side, where
Well, I was gonna say,
the
so
rich get richer, and these musicians, so many of them, sort of die destitute.
yeah, the Wailers were making a couple of pounds a week.
£3 a week.
Who
according to
was
Buddy
making
Wailer.
money at Studio One? Was there somebody
Cox
like
and Dodd.
getting absolutely rich? So it was
Cox
Cox
and
and
Dodd.
Cox
It's all-
was pocketing.
If you owned a studio, then you
Yeah.
made money. If you owned a sound system, Duke Reed, Cox and Dodd, all these guys, Chris Blackwell, who's about to enter the picture, it's the record labels and the studio owners who are often one and the same.
We do this on the show a lot. We draw parallels. Cox and Dodd is sort of like what Berry Gordy was
Yeah.
to Motown, wasn't
Very
he?
much
Like,
so. Except Barry Gordy did have copyright law to deal with, and sometimes to still rip artists off in spite of the copyright
Yeah.
law. But at least in America, there is the copyright law.
yeah, there's some protection. I think
Yeah.
that, and this is also a time I feel like Dodd is like, I love the story about how he's like, you guys aren't ready to perform yet. Like,
Yeah.
he holds them basically back for 2 full years, saying you guys aren't ready to perform yet. And these guys are
That
like,
would have been their only source of income
no, I mean, like, seriously, I just,
because they're not making it from the recordings.
they're-
Literally, they
they're
were
young
poor.
guys. And I love the story that they were like so convinced that he might be right, that like they might be too scared to perform, live, that they start performing for the ghosts in the cemetery. They're
Yeah,
like,
I love
if
that.
you can go to the cemetery
Then
at
you're
2
fearless.
a.m. and perform, you're not going to
No
be
crowd's
scared of
gonna scare
living
you, right?
people, no matter how big the size of the crowd.
So getting back to Lee Scratch Perry for a moment, I want to talk about how Lee Scratch Perry, again, in 1969, is already an artist. He also has a number 5 record in the UK, and his band is called the Upsetters. And it's kind of, we were just talking about Motown, it's kind of like the Funk Brothers, where there are a bunch of artists who come and go from the operation.
Yeah.
So the Upsetters aren't just the same drummer, bass player, keyboard player, etc. They rotate. And he's unable to get a band to tour with him. So he finds a couple of brothers, the Barrett brothers, who are 2 more unsung heroes of the story of Bob
I
Marley.
was just learning about them, but man, Carlton and Family Man.
That's right, Carlton and Family Man, brothers and a rhythm section, drummer
Mm-hmm.
and bass player. Aston, Family Man, Barrett is the bass player, and Carlton is the drummer. And the 2 of them are in a band called the Hippie Boys. And when they learn that the Upsetters need a new rhythm section, they join up. So Lee Scratch Perry has the Upsetters with the Barrett brothers in it. And this is when Bob Marley enters the picture, and he's just left Cox and Dodd. Not only does he need a new producer, he needs a new band. So this next chapter...
Correct me if I'm wrong. Lee Scratch had also worked with Coxon and was also tired of some of Coxon's business
that's right.
practices. So
he strikes
leaving-
out on his own.
They felt like they had been through that ringer together, and so now they're joining outside of that.
That's
circle.
absolutely right, Diallo. They're bonded in their disdain or in their frustration, I suppose, and striking out on their own from the confines of Studio One and Cox and Dodd.
Yeah.
So they make a couple of records together, and it's my contention that these are probably 2 of my favorite Bob Marley records. They are 2 of the lesser known records in the catalog because they are hard to find. They're actually not on Spotify. Their ownership is caught up in lots of copyright stuff because this is before Island Records comes in the picture. You can find the record called Soul Rebels. You can find the record called, confusingly, Soul Revolution Part 2. There is no Part 1. But these are the 2 records that Bob Marley and the Wailers made with Lee Scratch Perry on the
Pre-Island Records.
Pre-Island Records. He's the producer and co-writer on a lot of the songs, and this is the beginnings of the Barrett brothers on bass and drums, who stay with him his entire life, his entire career. So I'd highly recommend you go out and check them out. They're much grittier. If you're a Lee Scratch Perry fan already, you'll find that they're very much in line with his catalog's like minimal, stripped down approach.
And I love the video footage of him, Lee in the studio, because like you just get this. He's having the greatest time. Like he's bouncing around. They said he was like.
I know exactly the footage you're talking about.
Yeah,
As a lifelong fan of the band, there are only like 2 like clips of him, unfortunately, that seem to have survived from that era, from the early 70s.
It's like me, like at Harvard. I swear, they're like
dancing
2
around.
pictures. Be happy, kids, that you can document every facet of your life, because I'm always trying to find pictures of me at Harvard. I swear I went, you guys. I totally went to Harvard.
I believe you. I am going to need to see the diploma,
I know,
though.
I don't have it.
This is Small Axe by Bob Marley and the Wailers with Lee Scratch Perry.
So if you want a big tree, we are a small axe, ready to cut you down with sharp.
So that was the right chunk if you're a big tree. And it should be said, we were just discussing the whole leaving Cox and Dodd thing. That's actually those are shots fired at the big tree. It's a pun because the big three are Duke Reed, Cox and Dodd, and Prince Buster. Those three sound system operators / studio owners banded together to make a conglomerate called Big Tree Records. So
Big Tree
TRE.
Records, yeah.
And this is the song is
you
called
said you
Small
got a big
Axe.
tree, but we're the small
We're
axe.
the Small Axe. That's right. So they're united.
It's,
They're
it's
the
almost
rebels.
like a hip hop diss record.
It is definitely a hip hop diss record, and it's the three
First
of them
off,
united.
F Big Tree and that click you claim.
Mm-hmm.
Tupac hit him up. Anybody? Tupac?
Tough crowd. So one more important thing to point out about Lee Scratch Perry's connection to Bob Marley. Now, Bob Marley lived with Lee Scratch Perry for a while, who sort of treated him like a son, and we talked earlier about the whole
Because
father
Marley's
wasn't around
mom
thing.
moved to the States.
Marley's mom moved to Delaware.
I know.
Bob joined him.
She was like,
for a while.
I can move anywhere in the United States. I'm going to Wilmington, Delaware.
Bob came out to try to join her for a while. He's like, I'm not having this. I'm going to go back to Jamaica where there's sunshine and I don't have to work at the factory floor. I found a quote so David Katz is the name of a writer, a reggae specialist and writer. He's written a couple of books. One I highly recommend called Solid Foundation, an Oral History of Reggae. But he's also known as Lee Scratch Perry's biographer. And there's a book called People Funny Boy. It's 400 pages long, and I read the whole thing. He has this great quote, which is very important about what's happening right now in 1969, 1970 with both Lee Scratch Perry, Bob Marley, and reggae as a whole. He says Lee Scratch Perry changed the reggae beat, and he used the Wailers as the vehicle for that. And here's the quote from Lee Scratch Perry himself, which I will not do the patois, but picture a patois. When the people hear what I manna do, them hear a different beat, a slower beat, a waxy beat, like you're stepping in glue. Them hear a different bass, a rebel bass, coming at you like sticking a gun. So this is a moment where we went from ska in 62 to rocksteady in 66, 68, which is a little slower than ska, but it's not quite reggae. And in this moment, Lee Scratch Perry with Bob Marley and the Wailers is helping to craft what becomes known as reggae proper or roots reggae. And this is what carries us through the 70s. And it's all happening right here in this moment. And one more thing that Perry does, which influences Bob Marley, is his voice. This is a quote from Clancy Eccles, another famous Jamaican singer-producer, who said, Bob Marley never used to sing like how he sings now. He used to sing a different way, but Perry used to sing that way. Perry is how Bob Marley sounds now. And it's true. If you go back and listen to some early Lee Scratch Perry, you'll absolutely hear the connection between how the two of them sing. So they make these two records with Lee Scratch Perry, and then there's a falling out over, guess what? Money, as always. Bunny, in particular, is really fighting for getting paid fairly. Bob has sort of got a different mission in life, and this carries through his entire life and career, where he has a message to deliver.
Yes.
And he ends up making money, but it's never the primary thing. Bunny just wants to eat, poor guy. So there's a big fight. They have a dispute I've read this story several times from all of the different parties' angles. And apparently Bunny threatens to punch Lee Scratch Perry. They're at a restaurant. They run out. They're running down the street, screaming at each other, wailing at each other, no pun intended. There's a second meeting where they try to make things right. Yeah. But then Peter Tosh thinks that there's like a bottle of acid that Lee Scratch Perry has brought, and then he knocks it to the ground and it apparently starts smoking. So it confirms that it was
So it was acid?
Well, these are all different accounts of this interaction. I don't know what really happened, but there was a very acrimonious and possibly dangerous split that takes place.
Who brings acid to a business meeting? I guess in Jamaica.
Maybe Lee Scratch Perry. If you know about Lee Scratch Perry, it's not that shocking. He may have actually done that. So that's the end of working together with Lee Scratch Perry. And it's right around this moment that Chris Blackwell enters the picture.
Yep.
Chris Blackwell is a wealthy white gentleman who's from Jamaica. His mother is apparently Ian Fleming, James Bond author's muse. So he grows up, and he's got like some bit part in Dr. No, I think, which is filmed in Jamaica in 1962.
Chris does?
Chris does, yeah. I think he's
Crazy.
like a child in that movie.
Oh, check it out.
So Chris Blackwell signed Jimmy Cliff, by the way, which was his first effort. This is really interesting parallel. He tried to make Jimmy Cliff, another Jamaican star, into a global superstar by sending him to Muscle Shoals in Alabama to kind of inflect some American rock into Jamaican reggae. And didn't quite work for a lot of reasons. There is a great movie that comes out of this connection, which is The Harder They Come.
The Harder They Come.
Not just a great
Fantastic
Jamaican
film.
movie, but
Yeah.
a great movie. Really fun.
We tried Sherman Showcase. Fun fact: those who know me know I did a show called Sherman Showcase. We wrote an incredible parody of The Harder They Come, concerning our resident dance hall artist Mad Walrus, and I'm just so mad it didn't come together because of
I would love to
COVID.
see
We
that.
couldn't fly out the proper cast to make
Season
it come
3. We
together.
need a season 3.
Yeah, man. If we ever get the chance, we're definitely going to do that one again. But I'm sorry. Please continue.
No, I mean, let's pitch Sherman Showcase because that show needs a season 3 immediately.
No, yeah.
So the way they get connected to Chris Blackwell is that apparently Bunny Wailer tells the story, again with the money. He believed he was owed money because he was aware of Island Records and Chris Blackwell, the owner and founder, only because he understood Lee Scratch Perry had been selling their records in England, and somehow that was connected to Island Records, and somehow he'd never seen a dime out of it. So he's like, let's go meet this Chris Blackwell character and shake him down. Hopefully he's not bringing any acid to the meeting, but like all these record labels, Bunny's already starting to get a little beaten down and frustrated. This is 3 times in a row he's hearing about somebody else taking his money out of his mouth between Cox and Dodd and Lee Scratch Perry and now maybe Chris Blackwell. So they go to this meeting. They actually end up signing. This is the beginning of this next era of what we maybe the beginning of what most people know Bob Marley and the Wailers to be musically, because Chris Blackwell starts to change their sound. He adds what he tried with Jimmy Cliff before. He's adding American musicians. He's adding cleaner production, 24 track. The difference in sound before and after Island is like 2 different bands.
It really is.
It really is.
And when I think about Bob Marley's music, I do think about that sonically separated, super clean, low bass. Like, it's not the, sort of scratchy, no pun intended, Jamaican ska sound. Like, no, it's that stuff that sounded great.
That's right. I'll play you a perfect example. This is one of my favorite songs. The original, I should say. I prefer to the re-record. There's a song he did with Lee Scratch Perry called Kaya. This is Bob Marley, Kaya, the original version with Lee Scratch Perry,
Kaya.
1970. And here's that same song again as it was re-recorded for Island Records in 1978 for the album of the same name. This is Kaya, the much different, same song, extraordinarily different production.
Wake up and turn I loose, for the rain is falling.
I mean, what's interesting there are a couple of things. Obviously, it's mastered very differently.
Mixed,
but
it's recorded and mixed on a 24 track.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of separation. There's multiple takes were probably made. I would imagine, knowing how Lee Scratch Perry, how quickly he produced records, they were probably like, boom, maybe 1 to 2 takes at the most, and then we're done and move on to the next track.
By the way, I love ska. Earlier, I'm sure somebody out there listening, they're like, he just said that other version sounded better than the ska version. Listen, guys, most of the time I was like listening to music as an adult, I probably preferred ska to reggae because I'm a DJ. I like to dance. I like the grittiness of it.
It's faster.
You know what I mean? It's faster.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I never really got into reggae is because to me, growing up, reggae always sounded like lazy Sunday afternoon. And if you know anything about me, Sunday afternoon is one of my least favorite times of the week. I'm only looking forward to the week.
Sunday scaries?
I just never liked relaxing like that. Like, if you give me a little bit of time, I want to get hype. I want to get out there and like do stuff. And I remember somebody else saying that, like, ska was the music that you dance and you drank with. And that's important here because in researching this episode, it has become more clear to me than ever before. I thought of reggae as a political music, but it truly is a religious music. Like,
yes, the
especially for
Rastafarian
Bob,
component is major.
We didn't mention earlier, he meets Mortimer Plano in the 60s. Mortimer Plano is one of these guys who's just he's turning an entire generation of Jamaican men primarily onto Rastafarianism.
Yeah.
And
which is like a self-empowerment movement.
And
it's about Africa as the homeland. And
speech, one thing that you can't talk about Bob Marley without talking about Pan-African and sort of Afrocentric thought. And what it said was that, Jah is in all of us, Jah being God, and that, the black man of Africa was God, and that Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, Jah.
Yeah.
And that
He's
Jah was a living
Rastafari,
man.
same guy.
You don't have, part of it is really deep and intriguing. It teaches many things, including that, don't wait on heaven, that the idea that heaven's the place you go after you die is really convenient, a really convenient philosophy for the people who are in power right
already,
now.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's an
like,
anti-colonialist.
hey, you'll get justice once you're dead. But for now,
Yeah.
wax that floor, dude.
Rastafari comes directly out of the colonialism. It's
Yes.
it's a response to it. It's saying no,
Yes.
stop waiting.
Stop
empower
waiting.
yourself now.
God is a living
Live now,
man,
right.
and Africa is your homeland, and there's so many wonderful things about this, and
literally that the second coming is a black man.
is
It's
literally a
hugely
black man.
important,
I
yeah.
mean, there's the great story of when Haile Selassie visits Jamaica, and like people just run out and surround the plane, and it's crazy footage because that plane had propellers, I'm pretty sure, and like people are like
Stay
right
away.
up to the, and Haile Selassie gets out there, and like he's been told that like he's a king, but you don't get the impression that he understood what that meant
Yeah.
until he's standing
I know what you
on
mean.
the gang, what is that called, the walkway or whatever it's
Right.
called,
Gang-
and he's
gangway?
just like
Gangplank?
standing there for like a couple of minutes before he goes back inside the
Yeah,
plane.
he's like, "You gotta
oh,
catch
this
his
is
breath a
crazy.
little
But
bit."
then eventually they lead him through Kingston, and he's
But
waving.
it's like the
and
Beatles are in town.
He's
Absolutely.
waving and he's making eye contact with people. Like Rita says, he looked straight at me.
Right.
Like it's.
And then
that-
she saw his hand and she saw some
yes, and
symbol.
she said she saw a cross on his hand. I mean,
Yeah.
like you have to realize that Bob and the people that Bob was playing his music with, this is their gospel. Like he felt like this music would travel the whole world because to him, like this is Pentecostal church.
It's all tied together. It's freedom, it's power, it's the outcast status now has kind of a channel for being heard, being seen,
Yeah.
having power, actually. Going
Yeah.
from being powerless to having some power.
But it's also the Rastafari were not popular. They were. Well, it's not that they weren't popular. They were not.
They were
socially
feared.
acceptable.
They were feared
in
yeah.
Jamaica.
Yeah.
They were treated poorly.
Yeah.
And and here's Bob and his crew. Like they're representing something that is political and religious and also catchy and taking over the dance halls. And you almost want to see hip hop with all of its social cachet maybe do a little bit more of that. Like it's interesting that there is rarely as much of a a spiritual and political side in hip hop, at least since like the Public Enemy era. You don't see it that much.
It's hard. Marley masterfully mixes.
I love it.
Thank you. I could just stop there.
Yeah,
that was perfect.
You're peaking.
He's masterfully mixing politics with religion, right?
Yeah.
Because Rastafari itself is mixing some Christian elements along with an Afrocentrist.
I mean, for those who don't know, Emperor Selassie's name was Ras Tafari, and there are other people whose name is Ras, which essentially means king, I
Yes.
believe. But that's where Rastafarian comes from.
Exactly.
Also, the difference between those two songs you played, you notice in the Lee Scratch Perry version, it sounds one way. On the 1977 version, you've got the I tree. Got the I3, which is Rita and two of his background singers. The reason why Marley has Rita in his life, and honestly quite a few women in his life, is because they see him as a prophet. They see him as somebody who is bringing the message of God. And we all know that rock stars have often had a wife and many mistresses. I found it so interesting to find out about Rita, who I didn't know very much about. Her story needs to be told at some point. Rita, she knows that there are other women in his life, but she's like, he was too important.
Yeah.
She literally says he was too important, and I really wanted him to spread the message of God. So in her eyes, there's even the story about like one time he called her and he was like, hey, I need you to get these people out of my room. And she goes up there and she's like, all right, ladies,
Yeah,
let's get out of
exactly.
here. And I'm just like,
Bob's
damn,
mistresses, yeah.
If you think your husband's, that important, that it's not about that, but it's about what we're bringing to the world. Like I found that really deep.
She was clearly fully aware, if maybe not all 7 baby mamas for the 11 children he had.
Oh, yeah.
She was aware of most.
And by the way, she was nice
Definitely
to all
most
of
of them.
his kids,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is also really incredible.
Yeah.
So by 1973, they're on Island Records. They release Catch a Fire, amazing record, but they're marketed as a black rock act. That's basically what Chris Blackwell thought would be the best way to sell them overseas. And they go to England, and they're a little underwhelmed by the audience's
They're
reaction.
playing the club circuit. They're playing these
Yeah.
tiny little underground
They're
clubs.
playing these tiny little clubs. It's important to note that, Bob, for all his, Afrocentric views, he still wants the music to go out and go wide and spread. Bunny and Peter are a little bit more militant than that, just for lack of a better term. They're just like, I don't know if I get this. And right before the U.S. tour, Bunny Wailer leaves the group.
Yeah.
And because he hears, like, some of the places they're going to be playing, he's like, he uses the term freak show. He's like, I don't want to play these freak clubs. He's like, I'm a religious man. Like, I don't do that kind of stuff. And
he's not a fan of all the
yeah. I mean, like, you could even make the case that, like, a lot of the things that the hippies were into, like, Bunny Wailer was not with them. So he leaves the group. And then they do the tour, and for most of the tour, Peter is unhappy. And so as soon as the tour is over, Peter leaves the group.
He just wants to be home in sunny Jamaica. He's tired of these wintry, the British winters and such.
Oh, yeah, no, they hated the British winter. So Bunny and Peter, two very important members of the Wailers, are now gone. And what does Bob do? Well, Bob builds a new group.
He builds a whole new band. He recruits, very importantly, the I3s, which is the name of the backup group.
Yes.
And they are, in and of themselves, an important part of the story. It's Marcia Griffiths, Judy Mowatt, and Rita Marley herself are in the band, which means that Bob is touring the world with Rita.
Yeah.
He replaces the Barrett brothers are still there. He replaces the other members. We'll name them when we get to the stems in just a moment. But this is the beginning of their rise to global fame. From 74 to 77, they go from these, dinky clubs where Peter and Bunny are not having it and they quit, to rising to the top of playing 50,000 seat stadiums and
Ironically,
arenas.
it's after Bunny and Peter leave that they start playing the venues
Right.
that they would have probably enjoyed playing.
This is the global stardom that Chris Blackwell and Bob Marley together had strategized. It worked. The crossing over, they reached a wide audience. They reached a global wide audience. They're still not reaching a huge black audience. That's part of the
right.
story we'll get to in a little bit. But this brings us into the song story. So if we're ready to jump into jammin', now is a good time as any. Let's do it.
All right. After the break, Bob Marley's jamming like you're hearing it for the first time. Welcome back to One Song. We're about to play the stems for jamming, but first, Luxury, this song was written and recorded under tumultuous circumstances for Bob Marley and for Jamaica. Let me walk us through that really quickly. So, in short, Jamaica had two political parties. One was called the Jamaican Labor Party. They were the conservative party under Edward Seaga. And there was Michael Manley, who had the more leftist People's Nationalist Party. I know that throws people off because, like, Labor, it seems like that'd be the left. No, it's the opposite. JLP versus PMP. And they basically had gangs. I mean, like, they had these, organized groups of people with guns, shooting at each other in the streets. Lots of political violence in Jamaica. And Bob sees all this, and so he organizes the Smile Concert, 1976, to help bring, people together. Now, unbeknownst to him, and Bob Marley, look, I think we can figure out a little bit of what his politics were, but he often would say, like, I don't necessarily support the government of Michael Manley. I think that both sides tend to use the people and sort of get what they want without truly helping the people. But he wants unity. He organizes this concert. It happens in December, and I think sort of taking advantage of a situation, Michael Manley moves the election up towards the concert to make it seem like maybe Bob Marley's giving tacit endorsement to the PMP.
Tensions are riding high.
Yeah,
and
that increases tensions a lot. At the time, Bob Marley had what was the equivalent of the Secret Service, which was called the Protective Service, looking out for them. One night, the Protective Service suspiciously doesn't show up, and gunmen run into his very famous home at 56 Hope Road, and started firing off shots. And Marley and Rita Marley and some other people are shot. Thankfully, nobody injured. And there are all these people pointing fingers. Like, the JLP is like, oh, they were shot but not injured because, the PMP wants sympathy. And the PMP is like, no, the JLP is working, with Henry Kissinger and the CIA, and they're trying to kill Bob Marley. Bob Marley bravely takes the stage just 3 days after being non-fatally shot, and takes the stage. And he says he's going to do one song. He ends up doing a 90-minute performance, and it's supposedly one of the greatest performances of all time. They're just 80,000 people, 80,000 Jamaicans listening to Bob Marley, in his prime. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. And And after that concert, Marley's gone. He leaves the country. He starts off in Nassau, and he eventually goes to London because, to hear his friends say it, they were like, he was injured, and he was emotionally hurt that something like that could happen in Jamaica, and he didn't want to be bothered on that. He wanted to focus on the creation of his music. So he spends some time in London, and it's during this time that he crafts the song that we have to talk about, which is Jamming.
Just on the topic of exile, because essentially that's what happens. He gets on this plane right after the concert and gets the heck out of Dodge. He leaves Jamaica for all of 1977, where he's living with the band in London. They all have their own floors on this, apartment, and this is where they make the album Exodus, which is widely considered to be, in my personal opinion, outside of the Lee Scratch Perry albums, probably the best and most widely beloved Bob Marley record. It's the one with One Love, the re-record, Three Little Birds, Waiting in Vain, and the song we're going to talk about today, Jammin'. All of this is written during this London exile. Little side note, the B-side of Jammin' is a song called Punky Reggae Party, which is actually Bob Marley reuniting lovingly with Lee Scratch Perry. They had, after 5 years of not speaking, after the acid moment, the acid incident, they get together and they do this B-side. It's an homage to the punk rock movement that's happening in London at the time. They literally name drop the Damned, the Jam, the Clash. They even mentioned the Slits, although that was removed later because they were sexist and decided they shouldn't be name dropping a girl band, which is a little strange. In any case, the song Jammin' is written. They come back to Jamaica in time for this second concert, which is in April 1978. And this is called the One Love Concert. It's held at the National Stadium in Kingston. Very important thing happens at this concert. Do you want to tell us politically, going back to that for a second, kind of an attempt at reconciliation, I should say.
Reconciliation, yeah. He brings the leaders of the two major parties, Manley and Siaga, on stage, and he has them shake hands, and then he takes both their hands and he raises them up.
Really powerful moment.
And the crowd goes nuts.
There's footage of it. It's really powerful to see.
It's really good
You
footage.
see how uncomfortable these two white men are, too, which is really significant.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit. I, too, was just like, why are the two leaders of the parties white? They are not considered white in the same way that we consider white in this country. They are considered white Jamaicans.
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same thing. For example, Siaga, I think, is half Lebanese and his mom is mixed. And Michael Manley is too considered white Jamaican, not the same as white. So it's a very complicated thing. It is jarring.
It is jarring,
to see
though, visually.
all these black people,
right, at this
and
concert.
their two leaders
right.
are look like Joe Biden and Joe Biden's brother. But it's an interesting. It's obviously a holdover from colonization.
Right.
But this song Jammin' was a major part of that One Love concert.
Well, that's the song that is being played when that moment happens.
Yes.
So it's the perfect entree into our discussion of the song and the stems.
Yes.
Which is next up on One Song. Actually, it's right now.
All right, man. I'm excited for this. We've waited long enough. Let's get to the stems. What do you want to play first?
Let's start with the drums. This is Carlton Barrett. I mentioned him earlier, one of the two brothers who were stolen from Lee Scratch Perry, basically. One thing I wanted to just quickly talk about is how reggae drum beats, there are three primary reggae drum beats, especially during this era of the roots reggae, 70s era. One of them, which is by probably the most defining one, is called the one drop. Now, you've heard this one, and you knew immediately that it was a reggae song, because it's literally where you don't hit anything on the one. The downbeat does not have a kick drum. So the kick drum comes on the 2 and the 4. I'll play you some examples of that, so it'll make sense. This is Crazy Bald Head, and this is one of my favorite examples because, again, the one drop is the absence of the kick drum on the one. That means dun, dun, 2, 3, 4, dun, 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 dun. But you'll also notice that there's some really interesting stuff happening in the hi-hats. That's one of Carlton Barrett's specialties, is just doing really interesting rhythms and patterns on the hi-hat.
Them crazy. We're gonna chase those crazy.
And it's dropping that downbeat that makes you feel like you're kind of floating or like breathless for a second. And really, it's one of the two things that gives reggae music. It's reggae-ness, that and the upbeat, the skank happening on the guitar or maybe on keyboards or maybe both.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, that's how, if you wanted to just make a reggae song, you'd start with those two things and you'd sort of build outwards from there. So the one drop is the primary reggae drum beat, but it's not the only one. And actually, jammin' does not use that one. It uses one called steppers, which is the kick drum is actually going on eighth notes every beat. And you're still having a lot of play happening on the hi-hat. There's a third one, which is called rockers, and that is more of a kind of slowed down funk where it's boom, cat, boom, cat, which is made famous by Sly and Robbie a little bit in the mid-'70s around this time.
Makes sense.
So Carlton Barrett here, we're going to hear him play that second type of beat. This is a steppers beat, which is what he used for the song Jammin'. Pay special attention to how creative he really is with those hi-hats that go between being straight and being swung. The song is swung, a little swing feel, but he's got some moments where he throws in some straight eighths. It's very interesting. There we go.
I like that.
So it's
I
very
hear the
subtle.
swing.
Do you hear
I
the
hear the
swing?
swing,
Right.
absolutely.
The song swings, da, da, dun, dun,
Yep.
dun, 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 but it's very subtle to kind of go back and forth between the two. And
It's so funny to hear that there are funk influences. Obviously, we hear with the bass. I never thought we'd hear it with the drums because funk is so much about hitting on the one.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
right. The one. That's the foundation.
And reggae is sort of not that. But
It's
still in
literally
there.
the
It's
opposite
still in
of
there in the
James
drums.
Brown's
Mhm.
philosophy that you're referring to of the one is literally this is the opposite of the one. On the one in funk and James
Yeah.
Brown, the one is the most important beat. As long as you hit the one,
Yeah,
you
you're
can
good.
kind of do anything
Kinda
until
do
the next
anything after
one.
that.
You can go crazy.
your homework's done.
Yeah.
The rest of the evening's yours. And think about the diaspora at this time
Mhm.
because you've got Bob in Jamaica, you've got James in America,
Mhm.
and you've got Fela in Nigeria. So
Right.
the whole diaspora.
And they're all listening to each other.
And they're all listening to each
Yeah.
other.
I mean,
Yeah.
throughout the entire song, we've got that kick drum happening. And by the way, just for all of you music nerds out there is a lot of ways you can count time in reggae. I'm obviously calling those eighth notes, meaning my 1, 2, 3, 4 is a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, which would make it halftime. It is a famous thing that you can count reggae measures multiple ways, but
Yeah.
that's my definition. That's why I'm calling those
Here
eighth
we
notes.
say, look, 60 is 120, 70 is 140.
That's right. It's all math. Music math is a wonderful thing. Getting back to the one drop beat for a second, and again, this is steppers, not one drop, but sometimes Carlton is quoted as saying, or other people attribute to him, that he's the originator of one drop. I think one of his nicknames might have been One-E or Droppy, I forget
Yeah.
which, but he's not technically the originator. This happens all the time in all forms of music and all forms of things in life. Who was the first ever to do it? But a lot of people say that Lloyd Knibb from the Scatolites, and we heard them, by the way, earlier. When we heard Simmer Down, that drummer was Lloyd Knibb. And you'll hear him doing this thing, which I'm about to mention, which is besides potentially originating the one drop, being the first to think to do it, he also added a lot of these kind of Nyabingi African rhythms and kind of Cuban and Caribbean rhythms, basically, that are very similar to that hi-hat thing we just heard, how he was throwing out straight and swung and triplets. So I'm going to play again the song Simmer Down, and I'll point out the little moment where Lloyd Knibb from the Scatolites in 1962 was doing a little something similar to what Carlton learned from him, who was one of his proteges, how to do with his hi-hats. He's about to play something on the bell cymbal, which you'll hear, which is of kind of Afro-Cuban pattern. So notice that coming right after the horns play their part. You'll hear a little ding, 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 ding on the bell of the cymbal, basically.
Love that. You can hear it.
So
That
that's
sounds
just
great.
one of the influences that Carlton Barrett brought into
Yeah.
his reggae drumming.
Also find it interesting that these Jamaican artists have something called a one drop when we know that in their sort of caste racial system,
Right.
there was the idea that one drop
I find that interesting too, and
affects your,
I
and
don't-
by the way, Manley and Siaga sort of use that to their advantage.
Right, which is its own troublesome thing. There is also a very famous Bob Marley and the Wailers song called One Drop.
Yeah.
So this idea of one drop has multiple meanings, which I think
Yeah,
is what they're
absolutely.
playing with. Yeah.
All right, what's the next demo you want to play for us?
Well, let's go to Carlton's brother, Aston Family Man Barrett, on bass.
Awesome.
I'll throw the drums back in there for context.
Now, if you take those drums out, you really do understand the difference between halftime and full on, because like
Yeah.
that could easily be like a house bass line, you know what I mean? Like, but it would just be all do 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 do
Yeah.
do 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 do, you know.
You can even do
Yeah.
double time.
By the way, you wouldn't even have to necessarily change the cymbals. It's
Yeah.
just because of what the kick is doing that it goes to halftime in your brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Its context is everything. It's what you do around
it's
it.
so awesome.
There's not much going on in this bass line in terms of fills and melodic
Doesn't
ideas.
need
It's
to.
pretty
We
much
love-
holding
we
it
love
down.
the repetition. Yeah.
The bass, it's all exactly right. It's all about holding it down and keeping it steady.
Mm-hmm.
There is a pre-chorus, and I'll play that for you just so you can hear some variety in the
Yeah.
bass. And together, actually, it's interesting. You can really hear the swing that I was mentioning.
Yeah.
There are parts where you're just listening to the drums. You may not feel the swing, but when that bass comes in, he is swinging the bass big time. So the combination is where you hear swing, not swing, happening back and forth in this really interesting way.
Now, as you know, I don't play guitar, but I love the guitar part
It's a
of
great
this
instrument.
song, and I love the story about how tape delay sort of almost like invented this new sound.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think you're referring to the skank, the offbeat thing. So there's two guitar parts in Jammin', and I'm going to play both of you for them. One of them is Bob, and I believe he's doing the sort of basic skank that you're referring to. And that sounds like this. And I'll play that for you in context because where's the downbeat? That's the whole point of reggae. It can really throw you if you don't have context with other instruments. And it's all the ands.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
And what you just heard enter there, by the way, was Junior Marvin, the second guitar player,
Mm-hmm.
the lead player, and the two of them are playing very different parts. The second one, the Junior Marvin part, which is more of a like ba 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 ba, it sounds like it's got some wah, maybe some phase going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a kind of soloing line throughout the whole thing, and that's a little bit of this sort of native Jamaican influence, I would say. To your question about the whole skank thing, what you're actually hearing, you're referring to the fact that it is rumored that the earliest ska and
Yes.
rocksteady songs where that skank offbeat thing was happening in the guitar
Mm-hmm.
might have been Lynn Tate, one of the early guitar players, might have been Earl Ranglin, might have been somebody else. There's a story that gets told though that it used to get played just like I played it for you, where it's just that one note, the one
Yeah.
chick eighth note. And the story that gets told is they got a new piece of equipment at Studio One that was a
Right.
delay, which made that chick.
And
start-
nobody apparently knew how to use it. They were like, "What is this thing?"
Now, what is this thing? They turned it on. It was a delay. It was an
Yeah.
echo. It might have been a Roland Space Echo. I'm not sure. So they turn it on, and it takes those eighth notes into 16th notes. They go from chick to chicka, chicka,
Right.
chicka. There's just a little bit of
Chick, chick.
delay after each one. So that becomes the skank. They're both considered skanks, if you
Uh-huh.
will. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I
No,
think
no.
that's literally what you call that upchuck. The upchuck also sounds disparaging. Look, this is just what you call these things, okay? Don't shoot the messenger here.
You invented all these terms.
And this is what it sounds like in context. A little bit later on, you can hear more of that Junior Marvin lead guitar. He kind of starts to noodle a little bit more. I love it. I mean, everything in
It sounds
reggae
great.
is rhythmic. And these
Yeah.
are all rhythmic melodic parts, but all of them are creating this groove together. And here's a cool little soulful solo at the very end. This is the meat, man.
I mean, that is so soulful.
So soulful.
I love that.
It's soulful and rocking at the same
Remind
time.
us who that is.
That's Junior Marvin on lead guitar.
Junior Marvin, man. I believe he was not from Jamaica.
Well, I think he moved. He is Jamaican, but he moved to London.
moved
at
to
an early
London?
age. And there's a fun story about how the year he joined the band, the same day he got the call, he also got a call from Stevie Wonder, and he
Which
had
is
to make a decision.
By the way, we have a great Stevie Wonder story coming up, but let's stick with the stems. You have some great keyboards for us, don't you?
I got some keyboards from Tyrone Downey. It's mixed a little bit with the percussion from Alvin Seco Patterson. And let's hear what that sounds like. And you can also hear some guitar actually mixed in there, I noticed. So there's a few different guitar parts mixed together. So let's hear a little bit more. What we were just hearing had a mixture of piano and organ. I'm going to play a part that has a little more of the organ isolated, and then you'll hear the I3s popping their beautiful voices in towards the end of it. I love that. The backing vocals are so gorgeous. Here's another moment. Let's give them their flowers. This is Marsha Griffiths, Judy Mowat, and Rita Marley. And here they are. Background vocals mixed in with some keyboards and guitar.
Jamming, 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 jamming in the name of the Lord.
And I'll bring that back with, I'll add Bob to that just so you can hear how the harmony stack sounds.
We're jamming, 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 and we're jamming in the name of the Lord.
So beautiful.
I gotta say, it is amazing musicianship and amazing songwriting, but it's not the song that we know unless we're talking about Bob's voice. And I think you just proved that. Play us some isolated Bob Marley vocals from jamming.
Here's Bob Marley, isolated vocals.
No bullet could stop us now, we need to beg, no we won't bow. Neither can be bought nor sold. We all defend the right, Jaja children must unite. Oh, life is worth much more than gold.
You know, we have to talk about the lyrics a little bit there, because that's
say,
one of my favorite lyrics.
Best.
He says, for those, because again, it's easy to, with his patois and all the music, to not really grasp everything being said. He says, no bullet can stop us now. We neither beg nor we won't bow. Neither can be bought nor sold. We all defend the right. Jah, children must unite. Your life is worth much more than gold. There's so much to unpack there.
So much to unpack.
And I just want to unpack just a little bit of it now, and we're going to get right back. But
in light of the history,
no
right?
bullet can stop us. In other words, like, the violence
exactly
isn't going to deter us.
Yeah.
We neither beg, forget your money, nor we won't bow. We're not going to be sycophants. Neither can be bought nor sold. You know, money, possession, wealth, again, means, you know, not enough.
Bob
because
lived that truth. Absolutely.
Yes. Him and Stevie, I think, you know, let's talk about that real quick. Stevie Wonder and Bob Marley play a concert, and Stevie donates the money to charity, and that was so powerful to Bob, and I think that really affected when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and they threw out the colonizers. The Zimbabwe people said, "Hey, will you come perform for us?" And you know, his manager sent over the quote. They were like, "We ain't got it." And Bob was like, "Okay, I'll use my own money so that we can perform."
You mean like the fee?
Yeah. He's like, well, just to move the band and everything, to set up the venue. Bob paid that out of pockets because he felt it was important to be in Zimbabwe.
I think he beat up his own manager too, because
he kicked him in the chest or something like that. He kicked him, and his manager flew across the room.
It was the beginning of the end for their relationship. That was where Don Taylor started to be on the outs.
Absolutely, but you know, the fact that he played that concert, and then of course there was there was a bit of a stampede and some tear gas, but it was important for Marley to finish that concert even on his own dime, where he wasn't making money on the concert.
No African concert is complete without the tear gas.
No, because you know what? Neither can be bought nor sold.
Exactly.
Play us some more vocals from Mr. Marley.
Holy Mount Zion, Holy Mount Zion, just seated in Mount Zion, it rules all creation. Where?
I mean, again, this is gospel music.
Yeah.
You know, it is revolution music. It is political music. But in Rastafarianism, the political and the spiritual go hand in hand. And he's singing about Holy Mount Zion, which I believe in Rastafarianism is not necessarily the place just outside Jerusalem. It's actually considered to be utopia. It could be Ethiopia, but it's just supposed to be the utopia when everybody is treating everybody the way they should be treated.
Yes, this is not a Zionist song like in the Israel sense of the word.
Let's not say that. Let's not even dip our toe into that.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, wait, I don't mean.
Hey, I can.
I don't mean to Jewish explain it, but you can say whatever you want. But I don't know. We may not want to step into.
Well, we don't.
but we're literally saying the Holy Mount
we're saying
Zion.
the same thing.
Till the jam is through, we're jamming. To think the jamming was a thing of the past.
I mean, listen. I love the echo in reggae and in dub. Like to me, it's like such a defining feature.
It's like outer space.
Why? It's so spacey.
Yeah.
By the way, this was recorded in 1977 when Star Wars is coming out. Like, like there must have just been something in the water where everybody in the 70s just wanted to go to space. It just seems like maybe it was 2001. A Space
Oh, I
Odyssey.
mean, if you ever go to like the Jamaica bin at the record store and you look at the dub records, they're all there's so many like Star Wars like cute illustrations done by hand and that sort of like very individual style where it's like Darth Vader masks and like there's definitely a lot of spaceness happening. If you ever look at like Scientist is another dub producer who worked with King Tubby and Prince Jammy. There's a lot of space love. It's all another
space getting a lot of love and a lot of love in this song. I really do love the lyrics in the song. When we were talking about what's our Bob Marley episode for this season, we talked about this one because he says we're jamming in the name of the Lord. Like there's so much. If you think about the political context that he's singing into with the two leaders on stage, we're jamming in the name of the Lord. Jamming, by the way, there are a couple of ways to interpret the word jamming.
Yeah.
But I think the safest way is to say, dancing and having a good time, essentially partying. And, they're partying
in the name of the Lord. Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. I also think there's just a lot of great, we talked a little bit about some of the lyrics in this song. He's such a master poet. One of my favorite lyrics of all time is the lyric, "In this great future, you can't forget your past." It's one of those wonderfully circular, like Lennon does a lot of that.
It's simple, but it's profound. And the way he delivers it makes it profound.
It's simple and it's clever. It reminds me, I always go back to the John Lennon lyric, "Baby, you're a rich man." Like I love anytime you can make that perfect circle. He's just, he's great. And what's funny about a lot of these songs is, it being a part of the hip hop generation, I didn't know a lot of these were, Bob Marley songs before my favorite hip hop group, Interpolated.
Oh, is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, like I think about, everything's gonna be all right. And that the first time I heard that was in the Naughty by Nature song.
When it was Interpolated. Sorry, everybody in the world. that was louder than I expected.
Really loud. But listen, sometimes you got to whisper it, but sometimes you got to scream.
So you're saying
that was the dub version. But no, seriously, I also think about, his line about, I think it's from Trenchtown. One thing about music, when it hits you, feel no pain. It was used by Dead Prez in the song "It's Bigger Than Hip Hop."
One thing about music, when it hit you feel no pain.
And it was also used by none other than Drake on one of his very first songs. The track is "Over."
Till it's over, but it's far from over. One thing about music, when it hits you feel no pain.
I mean, there's about 10 years between those songs and about 20 years between them and Trenchtown. So that's, that lyric, which I never knew was an interpolation, is pretty fun.
It's a
Interpolation.
I really enjoyed your
Interpolation.
Thank you for playing me both of those.
Interpolation.
I'm not sure which
Interpolate.
I preferred between the two
Interpolation.
that you just played. Thank you very much.
Guys, stop
I
him.
Appreciate.
Stop him soon.
It's the one thing I do. Let's talk a little bit about samples and interpolations. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Well, the song Jammin' was sampled by the Jungle Brothers with Tribe Called Quest, DILLAO Soul, and Moni Love featuring Queen Latifah. That's right. The entire Native Tongues crew came together in 1989 for Doing Our Own Dang.
Don't follow the path that we're stepping. Truth to the soul is what I'm cramming. Reasons for this is the family stronger, like Bob Marley said. Seeing's believing, so seeing.
I love it when they do that in hip-hop songs, right? Or in any song, when it's just like a little fragment from the lyrics.
The tiniest bit.
The tiniest little bit, and it reflects what was just like mentioned in the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go to just Bob saying jammin' because they just name drop Bob Marley in the lyrics.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then now this next one isn't a sample, it's an homage, but we alluded to Stevie Wonder and the connection between Stevie and Bob a little earlier. Big fans of each other's work. They played a couple times together. One time was the 1975, what was called the Wonder Dream Concert, which was actually the first time that Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, and Bob Marley were together on stage since 1973 when they all went their separate ways. They came up for this one show, and it was the last time they ever played together. So Stevie Wonder brought everyone together for one last hurrah.
I love that.
And then a little bit later, Stevie Wonder does a song called Master Blaster, which is an homage, including a lyric or two that I will play for you in a second that quotes the song Jammin'. Here, I'll play it for you now.
From the park, I hear rhythm. Marley's heart on the box.
There's the Marley line.
Tonight there will be a party on the corner at the end of the block. Didn't know you would be jamming until the break of dawn. See nobody ever told you that you.
So that Jammin' Until the Break of Dawn. The song is called,
one of my favorite Stevie songs actually.
It's a great
and
song.
it's got, and it also has like that swing beat,
Yeah.
the steppers beat.
It's got the same steppers beat that Jammin' has.
Yeah.
The same kind of swing feel to it as well. Exactly.
And Doing It to Death by Fred Wellesley and the JBs. Like
Yeah.
that's got that dun 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 dun.
That's a triplet feel, so it's like 6/8 time. But the thing about swing and triplets is that they're connected. In a sense, now there's many different variations of swing.
Sure.
Rhythm has all kinds of variety between the notes of the bar, but essentially da 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 swing you can think of as being two of the three triplets. in
Yeah,
a triplet.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so
I
they
mean,
are related.
I will say, Latch by
Yes.
Disclosure has
example.
that.
6/8 feel.
As a DJ, those are really hard songs to mix in and
Yeah.
out of.
You kind of have to go into another one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember one time I was like, I'm gonna put all of them together and blow people's mind, but like it can be tricky when you're trying to blend in and blend out of those.
Exactly. All right, so buckle up for this next one. This is not, I've got a little tale to tell you about One Love. So there's a lot of complexity to the song One Love itself, the Bob Marley song. Has two versions. Let's start with that. It's first recorded by the Wailers, so with Bunny and Peter and Bob, in 1965. And here that is. This is the original One Love.
One love, one heart, let's join together and I'll feel alright. One love.
So that's the original ska version of One Love. And when we get to the verse, we have this melody. Pay attention to the melody. And as you're listening, ask yourself if it reminds you of something else.
Then I might pass on your dirty remarks. One love. There is one question I'd really like to ask. One soul. Is there a place for the hopeless sinner?
Does that melody ring any bells to you? It's pretty close to this to my ears. This is People Get Ready by The Impressions, written by Curtis Mayfield.
People get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage, you just get.
It's just the shape of the melody is very similar. And in fact, that first version, just to set it all up, there are 4 different competing credits for this song across 50 years. One of them is that Curtis Mayfield is a co-writer of the song. In other words, that's an interpolation. And he is given credit for it. In some version of the world, he's getting some royalties in certain countries. Who the hell knows? It is so complicated. I spent 20 minutes talking to my friend who was helping me research this. But in another world, Cox and Dodd has an ownership claim.
Oh.
It was re-recorded in 1977 for the version most people know, and that's this one here.
One love, one heart, let's get together and feel alright.
If you've ever noticed, this song is called One Love / People Get Ready because when it was re-released, they did go back and credit and give 50% of the songwriting credits, it should be said, to Curtis Mayfield for that interpolation in the original version too, but the original version does not give credit because of complexity of Jamaican publishing. It's such a behind the scenes quagmire of complexity. So there's a lot of different competing stories, a lot of people competing for the dollars, obviously coming from this song. But that's One Love as simplified as I could make it.
Yeah.
There's more that I left out of it. But I'm going to leave you on one more fun note. If you're familiar with the song Buffalo Soldier, you may have noticed the
Oh,
connection.
yeah, I know this story.
Yeah, to another song. Here's Buffalo Soldier. Now, Diallo, does that remind you of anything?
Maybe something that used to come on Saturday mornings.
That's right. It's very, 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 very similar to the song, the Tra-La-La song by the Banana Splits, a late 60s kids show, basically. With
Yeah.
a bunch of very strange to our modern eyes, like costume, kind of creepy costumes. Like
Everything from that
Five Nights at
period
Freddy
is kind of creepy.
looking, yeah.
Now, I've heard, this story kind of reminds me of Rod Stewart going down to Brazil, hearing something and not realizing.
Connection. Mhm.
And I think that the story is that Bob was he touring America? Like, where did he get exposed to the
He
Tra-La-Las?
was touring America, so he had a friend named King Sporty, who's
Mhm.
Jamaican, and
Yep.
who moved to America. So King Sporty is a friend of Bob Marley's who moves to Miami in the early 70s.
Mhm.
He wrote the song Buffalo Soldier,
Yeah.
and he produced the original demo, which I'll play for you now, by the way. This is fun. This is Bob Marley recording the original demo in Miami towards the end of the Kaya tour in 1980, and here it is. It's like a cocaine.
Is this 77?
That's 1980, and it's like super cocaine disco.
It's like disco.
Yeah, it's
I never
fast,
thought
too.
Bob would do disco.
It's like high energy, like Sylvester, like super speedy disco. So this is a song that King Sporty wrote, and he's living in America. There was actually a BBC investigation I found where they were like, well, Bob Marley was never in America. He couldn't. And they basically, their conclusion leaves out the possibility that King Sporty was in America and definitely had access to watching the Banana Splits in the 70s, as we did. So my theory is that, I think it's such a direct connection melodically. The rhythm is the same.
Yeah.
Even the chord change is the same.
So it might be a case where King Sporty brought, this.
I believe King Sporty
and
brought
Bob
it to
had no
Bob.
idea who the Tra-La-Las were.
I'm pretty sure that's right. King Sporty is credited. He gets 66% writing credits on this versus Bob. There's one more piece of the story, though, in case anyone's worried that the Banana Splits are going to sue. The Tra-La-La song is credited to the TV show's music directors, these Mark Barkin and Richie Adams, but the person who actually claims to have written the song was a for-hire jingle writer named N.B. Winkless. So he worked for the ad agency.
I'm sorry, what was that name again?
His name is Winkless. N.B. Winkless. He doesn't have
MB? How does he spell the first name?
Oh, it's like N.B. The letters N and B.
Oh, I thought his name was like EMBEE. I was like, what a weird first name that is.
It's still an unusual name.
MB Winkless.
He's N.B. Winkless Jr., by the way. His dad liked the name so much. Gave it to him. So this is a gentleman who wrote the jingle under the auspices of being a salaried employee for the ad agency Leo Burnett for Kellogg. This is like the 60s TV weirdness with like ad agencies.
That's like
sponsoring
Mad Men
everything.
era. Yeah.
Exactly right. So I think at the end of the day, it's probably, I'm going to go with that's the Tra-La-La song that was interpolated into Buffalo Soldier.
Yeah.
That's my theory.
That's awesome. Now, Luxury, Bob Marley, One Love, the Bob Marley biopic was released this year. It holds a 43% among the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but this is interesting. The audience score is like 92%.
That's so
like the
that
people
discrepancy is major.
love it.
Yeah,
How did you
interesting.
like it?
I thought it was really good, I have to say.
Yeah.
And this is the trouble where you see a biopic for someone you know a lot about. That you really only, it's like the opposite. You see only the discrepancies.
Totally.
You don't see the bigger picture because you're distracted by the things that aren't quite right. Or
What
the
was one of the
composite.
inaccuracies, or let's just say, one of the changes that the people took a lot of creative license with? That
I mean, listen,
didn't
I'm
like?
not the only one who noticed this, but
Yeah.
there's a scene where we talked about Cox and Dodd.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where they go in and meet Cox and Dodd, and they end up recording Simmer Down. Before they get to that point, Cox and Dodd shows up with a gun, and he's like threatening them,
Yeah.
which I don't believe happened in real life. I think what that really is they're conflating two of the famous sound system operators of the day.
Yeah.
Cox and Dodd was one, and Duke Reed was one of the other
Yeah.
ones. I mentioned him before in the Big Tree conversation.
Yeah.
Duke Reed famously was a cop who brought his gun everywhere. So my guess is that they decided, well, let's
amalgamated.
Let's meld the lore together.
But that wasn't really Cox and Dodd's style,
I don't think
right?
that was really Cox and Dodd, and Cox and Dodd's children don't think so either because they're really pissed and they're threatening to sue or something like that. But yeah, they're out there vocally saying that's not our father.
So 1 out of 5 stars.
Well, for the Cox and Dodd depiction, I actually liked the movie because I love the story. I love the man. And actually, it's kind of a coincidence that we ended up using this song, which is the centerpiece of the movie as well.
Oh, wow.
The Jammin' is in the, as we discussed on the episode, the two concerts where they're bookended by the Smile Jamaica and One Love that's also where the movie kind of takes over.
Yeah, totally.
So that was kind of fun to watch that in preparation for the episode. But like I said, that one little distraction shouldn't take away from what was an overall.
No, it shouldn't. But little details like that matter.
picture.
There was one moment from the movie that got turned into a GIF that got sent to me a lot, and it shows Bob Marley giving, I assume, Chris Blackwell or his manager, I guess it has to be Blackwell.
I think it was Blackwell.
Gives him a fist bump.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a second. It's early 70s.
Yeah.
Like, the fist bump was not a thing in
You
the
don't
early
think he
70s.
would have
Like,
been doing that then?
no,
No.
the fist bump, the history of the fist bump, I don't know why I even know this. It sort of starts with American black GIs in Vietnam, but it doesn't become a thing that like everybody's doing until like the early to mid 80s.
A Jamaican man and a British man might not necessarily
It's just
be
like
doing it.
little details like that will really throw me out. I mean, he looked less like Bob Marley, he looked a little more like Bro Marley. But I'm definitely gonna see the movie.
Yeah.
But I'm a stickler like that because I make TV shows and movies. They gotta get the facts right.
I know. And sometimes you've got to put in a lot of the like exposition, right? All the facts have to go in. So you have to have a character that embodies 5 actual people or something like that.
In the interest of time, but like
So,
a fist bump, I don't know about that.
Diallo, you're a writer and a movie lover, from what I understand. Seems to me like musical biopics are often kind of bad. Why do you think that is?
Listen, like I said, it's like like there was a scene in Straight Outta Compton, which I actually think is a decent
I like that movie.
biopic.
Yeah,
I liked it. But there's like a scene like, hey, Ice Cube, what are you working on? Oh, I'm writing the screenplay for Friday. Like, I'm like that conversation
That's the exposition thing.
did not happen.
That's what I mean. They've got to put all the exposition in. Like, here's what I am doing right now in order to tee up the next part of my life.
At a laptop. But, I understand that. But there's a difference between that, like getting a detail wrong, and some things that I think are just misguided from the start. I am not a fan of Clint Eastwood's Charlie Parker biopic Bird.
That was on my list to see.
Like it.
You don't think I should see it?
Well,
Not
no,
good?
watch it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you need to watch it.
Yeah.
My problem with that is that I feel like they paint Charlie Parker as a heroin addict who happened to be a genius, not a genius who happened to use heroin. And I just think that that's telling the story from a completely misguided POV.
Is it sending the wrong message? Like heroin equals genius. Like,
well,
we've
I
seen
mean,
that
there were
trope a
enough
million
jazz
times.
musicians who followed him down that road erroneously. But I also think that what the story Clint wants to tell to me is not what made Charlie Parker special. So Bird, not a big fan.
Okay.
Luxury, help me in this thing.
All right. Well, I'm producer, DJ, musicologist, and songwriter Luxury.
And I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ, Diallo Riddle.
This has been One Song. If you've enjoyed the episode, and you have, because you stayed all the way to the end, which means that you should go on to the favorite podcast platform of your choice, give us the 5 stars we have earned so clearly, possibly write a review, and tell all your friends. But until then, we'll see you next time, and don't forget...
Interpolation.
And don't forget...
Interpolation.